What's up, everybody? My name is Sanjay Chofel, and this is Talking Cinema. Cinema, which is synonymous with film, is an art form, a visual art form, used to simulate feelings, expressions of ideas, beauty, as well as atmosphere that the cinema world creates. Cinema has now become a language in itself. There's an art in making cinema, as well as an art in consuming cinema, in essence, to appreciate the aesthetics of cinema. And on that note, let me introduce my guest, Mr. Karma Dendup, a former colleague, TV producer, a national award-winning feature documentary film, Smile, as well as he's continuing his Buddhist series on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Mr. Karma Dendup.
Thank you, Sanjay.
How you been?
Watching you on television, and I am very honored to be your guest here on Talking Cinema, because it's always been, in a way, like I think of something and you do it. So it's like I thought of Druk Express and you went ahead and did Najan Express.
That's right.
And then I was thinking of doing this on Facebook because I resigned from office. But coming back here in office, it feels like I've never left. And I was thinking of doing a show like this, and here I am. I switch on the television and I see you interviewing our mutual friend Arun Bhattarai, who made that beautiful The Next Guardian, which I love. In my opinion, I think that's one of the best feature documentaries any Bhutanese has made.
It's a wonderful film.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, I mean, other than that, watching you guys on television, I was excited. And when you gave me the call to be a guest, I came hopping.
Well, welcome back to BBS. We're glad to have you here. The reason I called you here is because I know you are a film enthusiast. You went to university and studied film, just like myself. And I figured it would be a great conversation to have in terms of cinema. So basically, I want to ask you what your take on what cinema is, basically.
I mean, nowadays they throw this word a lot, which is, that's a loaded question.
It is.
Yeah, and cinema for me, it started out as a purely entertainment medium, which I used to consume as a kid, watch Western films, watch Kung Fu movies, and try to emulate what the actors were doing there. But then eventually, as I grew up, and an inspiration for me to choose this as a profession was His Eminence, Tsongsa Gyalmay Khyentse Rinpoche. I remember watching an interview of him on BBS where he was being interviewed for his first film, The Cup. And I went on to watch that movie. And eventually I enrolled myself in college to learn cinema because I thought that there definitely has to be more to this medium than just camera and actors and yeah, so cinema to me is life itself, like you were sharing in your intro as well. I mean, for me, cinema is a reflection of life. And when you watch most popular movies which came out in different times and in different eras, they tend to reflect what is happening.
It's reflective of the times,
Yes.
the situation that the world's going through.
Yes, yes. And to talk about cinema and our role as filmmakers in it, I feel, because this was a question that was asked, I don't know about your institute or your college, but every year at the end of our semester, our final semester, we would be asked, what is the work of a director? And that was a trick question.
That question was asked in my institute, in my university as well. It was a trick question, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So then it started off with the director is the captain of the ship.
Right.
Then that didn't make any sense because, yeah, like who we're sailing, where we're going to. And I mean, there is so much more to it than that. Then eventually, by the end of my third year, it was a 3-year BA course that I did, a BA in cinema in India. I came to understand that primarily the work of the director is to direct his or her actors.
Sure.
And I wanted to emphasize on the word her here because not only are we talking about the Me Too movement in the globe,
Right.
But here in Bhutan as well also, we have some exceptional film actresses, we have some exceptional filmmakers. I think one of your guests, I don't know if he has already featured or not, Dishan Roda.
I haven't. Dishan Roder is actually coming in the next week episode, so
So,
that would
yeah.
be great.
So yeah, so this would be an intro for
That's
your
right.
next guest, who I'm a big fan of as well also, who's always doing things to take cinema forward for Bhutan, not only with her own productions, but even with her short film
Sure.
festival.
And she started her Besco Bhutan thing, a platform where short films are streamed online,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you just pay a small amount of fee to watch these wonderful short films. So she's doing a lot.
Yeah,
And another thing about Dishan Roder that I really that I'm a big fan of is her genre in terms of Buddhist noir, where she takes it from the French noir, the German expressionist type of film style making. So I'll get more into that when I'm talking to Dishan Roder next week. But go ahead, continue.
Like we were sharing, it's reflective of the times, and that's why I named my production house. After I left BBS, I registered a production house, and it's called Reflection Films. And basically, to make a good film, you have to live your life as well also. And that's what I came to realize in my 3 years of studying films. The topics that they had in my film institute was, it seemed like any other college, because that was my second attempt at graduating when I joined my film institute, which was called the Asian School of Media Studies. And I saw that the syllabus was pretty much like any other course, any other, undergrad course. But then I came to understand in the time that I was in that institute that to be a filmmaker and to be a filmmaker and to make a nice film, you need to not necessarily be an expert in everything, but you need to be a jack of all trades.
Right.
And that was kind of inculcated in me when I went to that institute, because the final productions that we did, we had to work as, I'm sure as you must have had to do as well also, you had to work in different capacities. So sometimes you had to be the sound man.
That's
in
right.
some productions you had to be the
cinematographer,
Yeah.
script writer, a
Editor,
screenplay,
costume
stage
designer.
director. Right. You had to be all
Yeah,
in order
yeah.
to learn the trade, basically. Yes.
And before I go on further about what cinema is to me, I wanted to talk about what you're doing here with Talking Cinema as well also.
Sure.
And I feel this was important because so much of the time we are consuming cinema, like as you mentioned, there is an art of making cinema and there is an art of consuming cinema.
Right.
And the majority of us are consuming cinema without realizing that there is a method to this madness, if you can call it, because in a way it is madness. It's like when you go to a film set and you see what is happening, it's sometimes, especially now with the green screen and chroma and CGI, you look at actors performing in front of the camera, and anybody who didn't know any better would think that what is this mad show happening?
In a lot of ways, it's like a calculated, staged chaos, I believe.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
madness that you're talking about.
And the method to the madness being, because in my course that I was attending, we had 6 months of acting class as well also. And that's where our acting coach was teaching us about when you're acting drunk in front of the camera, then you need to know the space that you're acting drunk in, so
Right.
that when you fall also, you know where you're falling.
That's right.
And I remember growing up, going back to the days when I was a consumer of films, I remember watching Braveheart with some of the monks who had come over to do our annual Choco.
Right.
And you know Braveheart, and you know the battle
Wonderful film.
scenes. Yeah, wonderful.
Epic,
and,
epic
yeah,
film.
epic. And then the arrow hits people in all parts of their bodies. And the monks who were watching it thought that was reality, like that was happening in actuality.
But that's the wonderful thing about cinema, isn't it? That suspension of disbelief. I mean, for that 90 minutes, or in terms of Braveheart, that 2 hours or somewhat length of a movie, you're suspended. Your belief is suspended.
Yeah,
And it's almost that escapism, that you escape from that reality and dive into that world that the director has created or the scriptwriter has created. And you're in that realm, basically. And that's the wonderful thing about cinema.
Yeah, yeah. And while that is wonderful, I was talking about the fact that I mean, Mel Gibson did an amazing job. That was his debut as a director, and he acted in the movie, and it was an amazing film. But how we as filmmakers know that the amount of work and effort that must have gone behind the scene to create those 24 frames per second, you know. And when you think about the amount of work that goes into cinema, I feel like a show like Talking Cinema is important because it puts things into context. We can then start to think that I don't want to take the magic away. I hope that's not what you intend to do with this show as well, because at the end of the day, the filmmakers are so proficient and so good at their art that even while we are studying films and we are sitting and we are dissecting films in our film study classes in class, you still can't help but be overwhelmed by some actor who was in that moment.
I think the fact that when you're dissecting the film and trying to analyze the film symbolically or metaphorically, I think that appreciation for the film just becomes wider, I think.
Yes, yes.
So a show like this is intended to basically appreciate the cinema, aesthetics of cinema, as well as the language of cinema. And by understanding the language of cinema, you appreciate cinema that much more, I believe. So this entire show is intended for that. And hence we're having this talk here about cinema, because I love cinema that much.
So coming back to cinema and what it's supposed to do, and how it influences people, because even now, after being in the business of filmmaking, having worked in BBS for close to 5 to 7 years, you know, and working in documentary as well as being trained in fiction, I got to witness two different sides of the filmmaking genre. And when it comes to documentary, like your first guest, Arun, was sharing,
Yes.
there is a magic to it, and there is an almost addictive high that you get from working in documentaries.
Sure.
But I remember being advised by my mentor, who passed away, my film studies teacher, Rahul Saigal sir, and he warned me not to go into television. He in fact warned me not to go into advertising as well also, because he was sharing from his own experience. Maybe he knew about, or maybe he didn't know about, how addictive this field of documentary filmmaking is.
Sure.
Or how you get caught up in the world of advertising that you might not make a movie.
There's also this perception that because when you're making film, there's this a general feeling or an understanding that you're making art, let's say, and especially when you go into television or advertisement, there's that sense of you selling out. There's that sense of perception as well. Maybe that's one of the things that your professor, your mentor, might be pointing at, perhaps.
Yeah, we can only assume, because he's passed on, and may his soul rest in peace. And
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, he was an inspiration. But selling out, and I want to talk about that as well also. I hope I'm not going all over the place with my conversation.
This is cinema.
This is cinema. All right.
As a famous, I believe the Lumiere brothers had once said, cinema has no specific path to the future. It's open. It's an open future. And hence our talk is also open in terms of in the realm of cinema, topic of cinema.
Thank you for setting me free with that, because yeah, I was kind of thinking that I have this tendency, as you know me personally, that I will start talking about one thing and then I might divert and go in a totally different direction. But coming back to what you were talking about, people selling out, you know, and this whole conversation which I see online on social media, as well as this separation between so-called art films and mainstream films. I guess it's there, that's why people are talking about it. But for me, I grew up on Bollywood films and Hollywood films, and I mean Rambo, you know, Rocky,
Sure.
Terminator. I mean all these mainstream so-called popcorn,
Hollywood.
yeah, flicks. You know, I love them.
Budget films,
yeah, big
right.
budget films. And now we have the superhero genre that's
Right.
come in with the Avengers and the
Oh,
DC
yes.
superheroes. And for me, when I was younger, and when I first joined film school, and you meet all these lecturers and these purists, if you can call it that, who are talking about, hey, pure cinema should have no sound. You know, I mean, there's a school of purists who believe that if you put sound, once sound came into cinema, it corrupted the medium.
Right.
And in a similar way, you were talking about the German expressionism movement,
Right.
the montage movement in Russia.
The Soviet montage, yeah, right.
And the fact that they did not want to move the camera, you know, that if you move the camera, then it was almost sacrilegious to do that.
Sure.
I mean, we have to also take into account that back then the cameras were like
huge.
They were huge. Yeah.
Plus, this was during the World War I, World War II time period, so
Yeah.
these countries didn't really have excess amount of film stock where they could utilize, so they had to utilize the montage. They had to take clips from other film reels and then sort of put it in, hence the Russian montage became very popular, right?
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of the montage movement because, over the years, what has happened is montage, expressionism, the neorealism in Italy.
Italian neorealism, yes.
Yeah. And all these movements, somehow, the new wave in France, they come together, and when you study all of these, then when you are making something, unless you are sitting down and you decide that, okay, this movie is going to be full-on montage, you know, I'm not going to move the camera. And even with that decision, somehow at the end of the day, when you're working with documentaries and if you're working with fiction and taking from what Arun was talking about, you know, having an open mind when you're going to shoot.
Right.
You know,
the script
things keep
writing in
changing.
itself as a documentary, it's not pre-scripted, basically.
Yeah. But coming back to what I was trying to say about the Bollywood, the Hollywood, the art house, when I was younger, when I was in film school, that division was there for me. And over the years, it took me some time to get over the fact that I like Bollywood movies, because it almost felt like I came from film school and I needed to have I needed to dress a certain way and act a certain way and talk about films in a certain way. But the more I consumed Bollywood, the more I consumed Hollywood, the more I consumed now Korean and Chinese, and you know, there's some amazing movies coming out from China as well also.
Yes.
And Korea is doing amazing stuff. Even this year, I think they have maybe 2 movies, a woman.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, there are.
Their film industry is shooting over the top now. I mean, it's growing.
And I don't see that segregation. And because at the end of the day, I think what we need to realize or we understand as filmmakers is it is a means to an end.
Right.
The end being the message that you're trying to convey. And I remember when I joined BBS and I had an interview for the interview committee. And I remember them asking me that why do I want to join the BBS.
Right.
And because they said that most of the time people join the BBS because they don't know how to, the skill set that comes to
making television
programs and stuff like
documentaries.
Yeah. And they were saying that you already know that because you've spent 3 years in a film institute. And I remember telling them, which has been my answer then and now and will be for the future as well, which is that nobody makes a movie for himself or herself.
Right.
You make it for an audience.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, I was saying this back in 2005,
Right.
but it's relevant now also because previously Arun on your show as well was talking about the logistic problems of not having a theater to screen your movie in.
Sure, right.
And I remember coming out hot from my film institute and wanting to make movies and make a documentary or tell a story and not having the platform to show it on. And the Bhutan Broadcasting Service is the best platform to showcase whatever story that you have here in Bhutan. And I guess that answer must have worked because I did get recruited, and I have to thank the BBS for so much of what I am now. In fact, meeting you as well also. And
Definitely. But Karma, I mean, maybe perhaps you could also add on to it, but going back to the cinema and how you don't differentiate the art films and the Bollywood and the Hollywood and the different film genres, basically. How I feel about that particular concept is, as I said before, cinema has become a language in itself. And I kind of feel like these are the components of a language. So imagine you're learning a language, a foreign language, whatever language. There are components that makes up a language. And I kind of feel like having the knowledge or sort of understanding or studying the French noir or the Italian neorealism, German expressionism, the Japanese way of filmmaking. Now you're saying the Korean, the Chinese, and the Vietnamese. All of those, when you learn them, put together, you're learning the whole language of cinema. And I truly believe once you have an understanding of that, you appreciate the realm of cinema that much more. Perhaps you could add more to that.
I can, before I add to that, because what got this conversation rolling in a sense when we were talking about the different movements in different countries, I think it's important because while you may know it and I may know it, maybe the audience can derive a little from the limited understandings that we have of the movements. Because I think just like how you set me free that time by saying that, this is cinema and you were quoting about, that the Lumiere brothers. In that very similar light, when I look at the different film movements that have happened, the evolution of cinema, if you can call it that, it's wonderful to see how that cliched or that often used quote that they say that necessity is the mother of all inventions. Because you touched upon that when you talked about the montage movement in Russia, where the wars were going on and they couldn't afford to get reels, So they were basically recompiling and re-editing
previous works, right?
Yeah, previous works, and they were telling a new story. And that's how editing came into into being. So necessity became the mother of invention there. Similarly, you look at the Italian neorealism and The Bicycle Thief by De Sica.
Wonderful film.
It's a movie that inspired Satyajit Ray. It's a movie that inspires me. I was blown away by the cinema, the syntax, because you watch the movie and it moves you, but then you go to the library and this was in a time when there was the internet was not as cheap as it is now. So talking cinema, it's like amazing because there was no way that if I did not go to the library and look through that and be able to see that. And the important thing about film studies and dissecting and critically trying to look at films is it informs you and then in a way it enables you to be able to do stuff in a like manner. Because like you shared, now with social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, cinema in a sense or film is everywhere. Everybody's a filmmaker. If you have a smartphone even if I'm shooting you right now, it becomes a film.
That's right.
That's how loosely I look at it. And in a sense, that's what I was trying to get at was cinema, coming back to your first question, is for me it's very open and I don't like to put it in a box. And it's like how you freed me that time by telling me that, there is no...
Cinema is an open future, right?
Yeah. And coming back to the necessity being the mother of all invention, with regard to the montage movement, like I said, the fact that they couldn't afford new reels and they had to chop up old reels and editing came...
And put it together.
Dziga
Vertov, the Soviet who's actually did that, his theory on putting two juxtapositioning images together creates new meaning. Which is, I believe, now the foundation of basic editing.
Dialectics.
Everywhere. Right?
Yeah. And with regard to the neorealism in Italy, De Sica and what they were doing was they also couldn't afford reels. They couldn't afford celluloid because silver expensive and all of that.
Another thing that I would like to add before you get on to that is I believe the Italian neorealism movement could be adapted here in Bhutan because what they did was that they couldn't afford reels. They couldn't afford to pay their actors. So what they did was they casted normal people. And this is the type of situation that we have here in Bhutan. Although yes, in the mainstream film, we do have some very popularly known actors and actresses. But anybody out there who right now, budget is a huge issue when it comes to making cinema. So if you don't have budget, this is the type of skill set that we need to use as a director, as a filmmaker, where you could use non-professional actors. Every layman person out there who you think you could direct properly to tell a proper story, basically.
And going along with the neorealism movement, the fact that they couldn't afford new celluloid reels. What they could afford was the used up, the little bit of air had gone into it. So nowadays, when you're editing, and if anybody fools around with a Final Cut Pro or a movie
Adobe,
maker,
right, yeah.
you have all these effects, and you have that old film effect, which you can so easily now, thanks to technology and digital technology, you can do that. But at that point in time, they didn't have a choice. They were using this reel which had air pockets, in it. So when they projected it on screen, you could see these grains on the reel. But that
became a stylistic sense in itself.
Yeah, that enhanced the movie. It gave birth to so many of the so-called, like Arun was sharing, the creative
Art,
documentary.
yeah.
Nowadays, you want to use that effect to tell a story, so that
So
looks
that it creates a certain atmosphere or the
yeah.
feel of the film. Very interesting. Please continue.
And but yeah, and having that looseness or the openness to go and make your film, like you were sharing, and your previous guests as well also, is when the French started to get their feet into the game, then they changed everything. And I feel that so much of Hollywood filmmakers like Scorsese, which I'm sure, or be it Tarantino, while they, I don't know, I'm not sure whether they use it as a reference or they say that they were inspired by the new wave. But for me as a film student, when I watched the new wave movies of Truffaut, Godard, and I was seeing the birth of, I was thinking that if this could have been a Scorsese movie or a Tarantino movie. I mean, you watch Breathless, and then you watch, what is the, Godard. Godard was Breathless. Then Truffaut's 500 Blows.
I believe so.
Something like that.
I believe so.
Yeah, yeah. And what the French did was they started to move the camera around, and boy, did they move the camera around.
They did.
I mean,
Which
they
sort of revolutionized the way film, the language of cinema.
Yeah, and
basically changed or evolved.
And filmmakers also put technicians and inventors to work also, because when they said we want to move the camera through a crowd, and you couldn't do it with those huge mammoth cameras that they used back then they had to come out with those small portable cameras, the 8mm and all those other cameras that you could.
But you see how each of the film movements is conditioned by the previous movement. I mean, going back to the Soviet montage, the man with the moving camera. I mean, that was probably one of the most iconic films that have sort of influenced the new wave, French noir type of film where they started moving the camera. I mean, that could be one of the, if we look back in the history of, perhaps even study the film history of it, that was one of the most influential films that has probably started that French movement.
I would have to agree also, yeah. I would, yeah.
Because it's literally a man with a camera on screen moving all around Mother Russia, basically.
Yeah, I think you can't argue with that. And while we were talking about the film movement, I think one which got overlooked was the German expressionism, the avant-garde, the Weimar years, and
one of my favorite genres in film, filmmaking.
I've seen what you put up on Instagram on your IGTV channel, and the one with the pandemic,
my attempted short film that I made.
Yeah, and was it influenced? I'm sorry.
It's greatly influenced by the house of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu. I mean, these were the very beginnings of German expressionist films.
Yeah, yeah.
So very much influenced.
I hope I'm not changing the
yes, you're asking me questions now, but I'm readily available to answer it because it is one of my favorite genres. Yeah. And you could also see the French noir. The new wave has also been influenced by the German expressionism, especially with that high contrast of like light and shadow, that unusual camera angles, which sort of, I mean, in a lot of ways, yes, the French, with their new wave, moving the camera has changed how cinema has evolved. But that camera angles have also changed how cinema has evolved, and it's a beautiful thing. And now that we are here at this moment of time, knowing all of that language of cinema, the genres of cinema, and utilizing that is such a beautiful way to tell your perspective of how you want to tell a story.
Exactly. And I mean, like, I love what you did with your the video,
Right.
the film that you made on IGTV on your channel. But I also wanted to talk, because we did kind of briefly talk about the montage movement, the neorealism, and as well as the new wave. I mean, as one of our old colleague used to say, Dawa,
Right.
who had his very popular show Dawa's Kudrin. He used to always say that the one thing that we don't have in BBS, so in that very similar light, keeping time in check, I would just like to briefly talk about the German expressionism movement as well also. And I remember watching the Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, and I couldn't believe that it was made in the time that it was made in, because it's black and white. It's almost like a Charlie Chaplin. I mean, it's reminiscent. It is of that similar time
Yes.
as Chaplin, but at the same time, the subject matter and the suspense. Because when you watch the Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, I hope you'll be able to show some clips of this.
I will be.
Yeah. And how the climax of that, I'm not, spoiler alert, I'm not going to be talking about what happens in the climax of the Cabinet of Dr. Calgary. But what I remember is watching that and thinking that, oh my God, this is the Sixth Sense of Manoj Night Shyamalan, Because you watched The Sixth Sense, and everybody who watched The Sixth Sense could not have guessed what the ending of The Sixth Sense
That
could
ultimate
have been.
twist.
Yeah.
Well,
and the
he's
Cabinet
one of
of
the master of twists, right? Twist endings, right?
the Cabinet of, I can't agree with the later films that Shyamalan has made,
Well,
but
can't win it all.
yeah, I know. And I guess you can't please everyone all of the
Right.
time. Going back to the Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, it was mind blowing. Yeah, there was no way that you could not only guess the climax of the movie, but even imagine that was made in a time that it was made in. And now we find ourselves here talking about movies which were made in the 20th century,
yeah.
turn of the century, and the fact that we are still talking about it. And a movie, because we are talking about cinema, another thing that cinema followers can look into would be Battleship Potemkin.
Potemkin, yeah.
Yeah. From the montage movement in Russia.
And
Because-
that point of view shot, just beautiful. That staircase, lady with the stroller and the baby.
Yeah.
I will be showing these scenes. You'll know what I mean, basically.
And I'm sure people can assess, and you can also judge by the fact that cinema consumes so much of my time. In fact, so much of what I say might even be derivative of some movie dialogue. And in the years that I have spent after I resigned from office, I haven't been actively shooting stuff because, as you shared, I am trying to keep alive my Buddhism show as well. And alongside that, I am also doing Changsem Monday. So two of these initiatives take a lot of my time. But even these, I have tried to bring cinema or films and trying to make videos of schools which come on board with us with Changsem Monday, which I edit myself. And I find I'm observing myself more and more, and I see that cinema influences you in a way that, for instance, my wife would be a better judge of how much it influences me, because if I'm watching a movie of a Hollywood movie of somebody in the south of the United States, then I finish watching the movie and I start to speak with a southern drawl. I might watch a Bollywood movie and I come out talking like somebody from Mumbai, So, these are just small examples of how it influences you. And I was telling my wife that if it's doing that to me without my knowledge, then what it must be doing to my brain and to my thought process, because these are tangible and audible things that you can see.
Right.
So I feel, while I'm here in your show Talking Cinema, while I don't have I don't see a division in the kind of genres or mainstream or art
Sure.
films or so-called any other school of film that we can talk about.
Right.
I do also feel that filmmakers have a responsibility.
Yes.
And like I said, if I'm watching a movie based in somewhere in North Carolina or somewhere and starting to talk like somebody from there, then what it must be doing to my brain, one can only imagine. And in that similar light, if we can bring the conversation back, to Bhutan, while I'm a huge fan of what so-called mainstream Bhutanese cinema has been able to achieve by not having any outside movies screened in our theaters here in
Right.
Bhutan, which is a success, which I don't entirely agree with, because while there is still cable television and you can watch these movies on your smartphones and on YouTube,
internet, right.
the whole experience of, one of the reasons why we became filmmakers was, I'm sure, not to have our movie screened on Netflix, but to have a theater release, to sit in the audience and to maybe hear cheers or maybe see people cry or maybe hear people boo.
Hence the word cinema. I mean, cinema just not just only refers to the art of making film. It refers to an actual a structure where people go to watch films.
Yeah. And coming from my mouth, because I don't have a body of work yet, I would like to emphasize on the word yet, because I have been working on two or three scripts, which I don't know when it will see the light of day.
Can you briefly just give us maybe a synopsis on what these scripts are about?
After I left office, I did a lot of soul searching and introspection, and you can call it a sabbatical if you want. But in that, what I found out was the reason why I got into this field was, like I said earlier, I was inspired by Zonsa Jamyang Khyentse. And so much of the person that I am is hugely, I can't say, so much of who I am is because of my Buddhist beliefs.
Sure.
When I was younger, I liked to be cool and say that I am spiritual, I am not religious. But over the passage of, through the passage of time, what I have come to accept is that I'm a Buddhist, and I'm very proud to be a Buddhist, because the soul searching, the introspection, the retreats that I have done has informed me to be sane in a way that I am sitting here and communicating with you, and also go back and complete my college education.
Right.
So Buddhism had a huge role to play in that.
Sure.
And being inspired by Zonsa Jamyang Khyentse, I wanted to share the message in a way, not in a missionary, imperialistic kind of way, because that would defeat the purpose of what Buddhism is about.
Sure.
But I wanted to share the message of what the Buddha had taught. And the scripts that I've been working on are, one is like a modern day adaptation of the Buddha's life.
Sure.
I hope I'm not, you said there is no diversion.
His Eminence Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche had just put out a film called Looking for a Lady with Fangs and Mustache and a Fang. His films are usually influenced by that Buddhist concept of it. Now, obviously, you're working on these three particular scripts, and you've just said you are influenced by the nature of Buddhism. Would you be also making films? Are these scripts similar to that of what His Eminence does with his films?
When I talk about Zonsa Jamyang Khyentse and the way that he makes films, I'm a huge fan. Like I shared in the beginning, I'm inspired by Rinpoche. But I think Rinpoche also assisted Bernardo Bertolucci when he made The Little Buddha. And without making you think that, again, I'm digressing or I'm diverting away from what I'm talking about, I feel when I'm talking about the life story of the Buddha, I'm not talking about a movie influenced by Buddhist philosophy. I'm talking about Buddha as in the historical Buddha Shakyamuni. His life adapted to modern times. And for a very long time, when I watched The Little Buddha, I felt Bernardo Bertolucci. I'm not saying that I would know better than him. I mean, I'm a huge fan of The Last Emperor. But when he made The Little Buddha, and it was, I think, one of the first movies to be Hollywood movies to be shot here, partly here in Bhutan. I feel if he had just made The Life of the Buddha with Keanu Reeves, it would have been a bigger success than what it was.
Okay.
Because not many people talk about the little Buddha or what he was trying to do there. I mean, he must have had his reasons to try to put the tukus, the reincarnation, because it is fascinating for, I guess, for a Western audience.
Right.
But it's my personal opinion that if he had just made a story of a Buddha with the budget that he must have had, and I'm not sure, but Rinpoche was, I think, an AD with, or was a creative consultant, I think, with Bernardo Bertolucci in that project. So what I am thinking about is a story of the Buddha in this day and age, and without giving too much away of what the story is about. I am a father of 2 daughters, and I see how we raise our children, given whatever resources that we have. We raise our children in the way that King Shuddhodana, in Dzongkha, he would be, I think, Gebos Setsang, the Shakyamuni's father, Buddha Shakyamuni's father. The way he raised Siddhartha is the way we are trying to raise our children.
Sure.
And I feel there is a parallel, there is a message. Because what eventually happens, I'm not saying that we are raising our children to become Buddhas. Maybe we are. But he tries to shield the Buddha from any sort of pain, sorrow, suffering.
Fear,
he even has,
injuries.
old people were not allowed to work in the palace. He had 3 or 4 palaces where plantation, vegetables or fruits, whatever, flowers were always blooming and blossoming. So he was kept away from death, dying, decay, sorrow, pain of any sort.
Sure.
He dyed his hair black. He didn't have any old people working in the palace.
Forever young. People
Forever
were
young,
Right.
And the way we raise our children, when they want the phone, give them the phone.
Right.
You want chocolate, here, have a chocolate.
Okay.
You want a sugary juice, So I feel
In that sense, it's similar to that.
it's similar to that. And I feel that a story is there
Right.
of maybe a millionaire or a billionaire, who's raising his boy.
That's a very interesting concept, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, but one of the courses that I've taken in my film school was religion and film, and the Wachowski brothers Matrix is actually about about Jesus Christ. So I could definitely see how the films can be adapted with the religious type of adaptation. Interesting, very interesting.
So that's one project, and the other one is, again, it's a biopic. It's again Milarepa, who is known as the king of all yogis, and his story has been, I think it was a very popular, one of the few theater performances that we had. I don't know if you can call it theater here in Bhutan. One of the, in fact, I think one of the judges in many of the shows, I think he served as a chairperson of the film division or the film association here in Bhutan. Mr. Mila Tobge.
Yes.
I don't know if his real name is Mila, but I know that he acted as Mila because I was a boy when I saw him act as on stage as Milarepa, and it was recorded on VHS. So that was there. Then there are 2 or 3 different versions of some other Tibetan, I think, Rinpoches and masters who have done the Milarepa story. But I am looking at that story also in a modern day and age. And if I'm sure the audience might be aware of it, but if you're familiar with the story of Milarepa, he's supposed to have committed multiple homicide, if you can call it that. Yeah, so close to 29 or 33 people, I forget the number.
Wow.
Yeah, and he is supposed to be one person who followed the Vajrayana path and who became enlightened in one lifetime.
Sure.
So it's a huge inspirational story for many Buddhist practitioners that if you can kill this many people and still get enlightened in one lifetime, that's a story of hope. So that story...
Is this going to be a horror film?
No, it's not.
Okay.
What this might be is, it might be a jihadist kind of like a story loosely running parallel with global terrorism.
Okay.
Because while the story of Miller Eba is about him learning the art of black magic and sorcery and demolishing his uncle's paternal uncle's house and killing so many of the people who were attending a wedding there, I think in this day and age, while we believe in different kinds of magic, magic is not really, I mean, the
It's
magic
things that we don't understand, basically. Back in the day when they didn't understand science, they thought it was magic. Similar to that, basically.
So adding science to that magic, I think a bomb would suffice.
If you want to adapt it towards the modern context, I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
you
yeah.
would probably need to adapt it to that.
I haven't done
sense
much
of-
because this story I was actually working on as a theater. I wanted to write. I've always wanted to write a play.
Sure.
So I wanted to adapt the biography of Miller Eba for the theater for a stage here in Bhutan. But looking at how things were evolving and given my training, I thought the story would be much more better for the audience if it was made into a film. And when I saw that, and there is Marpa, which who is the teacher of Miller Eba, and I'm just sharing this story on your show today because who knows, maybe I might not be, maybe my idea might not see the light of day.
Sure.
And somebody who's watching this might be inspired to take the story forward.
That's right.
And while many filmmakers are tight-lipped about their projects and their stories, I have always been of the belief that, you know,
You keep
what
it
I
open.
can do, you can't do, and
Right.
what you can do, I can't do. So you might be looking at this chair, and you might make a story about this chair in a way that I might never.
It's a different perspective, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you're right. I mean, I've given lectures to students from RTC as well as RIM and all that stuff, where I talk about film. And what I tell the students is there's about 30 students in the classroom. And if I tell them to make a short little video, short film on a let's say, Buddha Point, there will be 30 different films on Buddha Point.
Exactly.
It's different perspectives, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So that story of Miller Eba, if I don't make it, somebody else who's watching this show makes it. I saw the parallel of how Marba tortures Miller Eba. I mean, for a lack of a better word, he's actually his spiritual guru. But what Marba does to Miller Eba to cleanse his so-called negative karma, I feel Marpa could, the role of Marpa could be the role of a jailer,
Sure,
and Miller Eba could be a prisoner.
sure.
And this whole story, which played out in the 12th century in Tibet, can be readapted. Because one of the filmmakers that really inspire me is, of course, Akira Kurosawa from Japan. But alongside that, like Kurosawa adapted Shakespeare plays,
Yes.
there is a filmmaker in India who's called Vishal Bharadwaj. And he made, the ones which I've watched, he's made 4 or 5 films, but the ones which I've watched, which are adaptations of Shakespeare plays, were his first movie was called Maqbool, and that was an adaptation of Macbeth.
Okay.
Then he made Omkara,
Sure.
which was an adaptation of Othello.
Sure.
Then he made Haidar, which is an adaptation of Hamlet.
Hamlet. Okay.
And yeah, I think I haven't counted, but even the names, the letters,
They're very similar.
yeah, Maqbool
Right,
and Macbeth,
Macbeth.
Omkara and Othello.
Othello.
I know, and Haidar and Hamlet. No? And looking at how he was able to adapt those stories and make Haidar is based in it's based on the Kashmiri, you know, the boundaries and the problem, the unrest which lies there in Kashmir.
One thing I wanted to mention, Karma, it's this concept of how different cultures adapting the story. And this is the conversation that I had with my first guest, Arun Bhattarai, about how, in the end, regardless of what you're making, documentary films, feature films, art films, mainstream films, big budget films, it is the story that counts. And it needs to be relevant all throughout that realm of whatever culture you are, whatever religious background you are, whatever race you are. If the story is innately good and that anybody could reflect on it, you could adapt it within the context of your culture.
My thoughts on that is also informed by like I shared in the beginning, so much of what I do, how I think, how I live is really influenced by Buddhism. And thanks to the BBS, I had a good fortune of interviewing quite a few Rinpoches.
Sure.
And one Rinpoche which I interviewed in Paro was His Eminence Sheshen Rabjam Rinpoche. And at that point in time, when I was asking the question to him, I thought I had a very good question, but his answer made me feel a little dumb, but it enlightened me, if I can call it that, because the question that I had for His Eminence was, it was the 100 years of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the celebration, they were marking it, commemorating that event in Sansam Chete in Paro.
Right.
And I remember asking Rinpoche that, is the Buddha's message relevant to this day and age? And to anyone who hears this question, it sounds like a all right question to ask. But the answer that Rinpoche gave me, he said that he I think, I don't know if he smirked, he chuckled,
Right.
as is the classic case of it with Rinpoches, and Star Wars, Jedis. So in classic Jedi style, Rinpoche smiled and he said, see, what the Buddha taught was medicine, if you can call it that, to the 5 poisons. And categorically in Buddhism, we humans are supposed to feel 5 base emotions, which is Decha, Shedan, Timu, Ngage, Thado, which is, like pride, jealousy, anger, ignorance, and all of that. And Rinpoche says that when the Buddha walked this earth, people had these 5 poisons in them. Fast forward 2,500 years ago to this day and age, people still have these 5 poisons in them. So the Buddha's message is still relevant because the disease, so-called, is still there. In that similar light, I feel whether a story or a scene or a message is relevant or not is how you make it relevant.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, we share this planet and we are all trying to navigate our way through this thing called life. And we are within the realms of these 5 emotions. And every story on every continent, in any country, of any race, sexual orientation or gender, we are subject to these 5 emotions. And if we can find a way to tell that story, then
And
I'm
I
sure
think
we'll find
cinema in its essence is driven by these 5 emotions. We normally tell stories based on those 5 emotions.
Yeah.
And this is what makes it dramatic, interesting, and amazing to watch.
Yeah, without these 5 emotions, there'd be no conflict. And without conflict, there is no story to
drama
tell.
or story.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about conflict is that it's fun to watch it. But when you're in it, it's I mean, like anybody who's watching this show also who is in a relationship,
Sure.
It's when conflict happens, it's you tend to lose hope. You tend to think this relationship is over, But cinematically, as you and I are both students of cinema, I mean that's when the story is just starting.
I see a movie in that.
Yeah.
A breakup is a movie.
It's a movie.
Right?
It's a movie. It
And,
can be a
and the
comedy
funny thing
movie.
is, my guest, Mr. Karma Wachusanam, his film, The Black Dago, is actually based on one of his friends' divorce. So you see how it translates into a cinematic form of communication, and it's interesting. And life in itself, I mean, I'm a huge believer that life is the biggest drama ever. That only cinema just adapts from it.
Yes.
Or perhaps maybe it's the other way around, who knows? Because cinema does influence, doesn't it?
It does.
But Mr. Karma, because of the lack of time and whatnot, the one last question that I want to ask before we close the show is, having that much experience here in BBS, still working on your Buddhism series, still working on the Jangsen Monday, cinematically, what would you say to any young film enthusiast who want to do cinema, study cinema, or work on cinema? What would you tell them?
Film institutes might not like what I'm going to say,
Okay.
but it's you don't need to go to film school to learn to make films. So much of what we shared about the film movements and all of that, if you know that, it's obviously a plus point,
Sure.
because then you have a knowledge base that you can derive influence and be inspired by. But there is a very popular Bollywood filmmaker called Ram Gopal Verma. He stopped making films now, but he learned how to make his first movie, which was a big blockbuster hit in India. It was about gang violence and all of that. It was a South Indian movie. It was called Shiva. And he learned to make that movie by watching Sholay, which is a Bollywood
It's
classic.
a classic, isn't
Yeah,
it? Right.
Sholay. And he watched Sholay almost 50 times, I believe.
Right.
Yeah, and that's how he learned to make films.
Right.
And similarly, when you go through the annals of film history, you see so many filmmakers who never went to film school and who just wanted to tell the story so badly that they found a way to tell the story. And it's like Picasso, Nowadays, my younger daughters, I feel that she might be an incarnation of Picasso, because she takes whatever she has and she's painting and scribbling all over my walls, my white walls. And it's like Picasso said, if I find a pencil, if I don't find a pencil, I'll find a charcoal, but I'll be painting and I'll be doing it. And the message that I'm trying to convey is, you need to want to tell the story.
Okay.
And you are already armed. And how dangerous you can be is, what is the story that you're going to tell?
Okay.
And there is no formula to a successful film. For me, like I said, I might come across as being too laid back, but to me, a film being made is a huge success. Is because both of us know how much effort and time goes into first starting from an idea and developing that, and how many drafts go into making a story. So if you can make a film, it's now you have. I think one of your guests, I don't know if your guest said it, you have your smartphones.
Right.
You can tell a story. And the story. Another thing that should be liberating to the audience is, there is a genre which now everybody is informed. There's short films, and a short film can be as short as 1 minute. It can be even 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Just last night, like I was sharing to you
earlier,
before the show, there was a 33 minutes film about George Floyd, loosely inspired by that, and it was amazing. It blew me away yesterday on Netflix.
What is it called?
Not sure. I'm not really good with names.
But if you go on to Netflix and you look at the documentary section,
it has
I'm sure
the word strangers.
It's got the word strangers.
I think it's Among Strangers or Distant Strangers. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's a short film. And because it's just been put on and it's nominated for the Oscars this year, so it's an amazing movie to watch. And it would definitely inspire anyone, because when you look at count the characters which are in the movie, it's a short fiction, there's maybe 4 of them, and it's short. I mean, like, as the story progresses, it does expand on its location, but otherwise it's just a bedroom, a living room, and the streets, the front alleyway of a building. And that's what it took for that filmmaker to tell a story which has moved me and inspired me, and that's what we need to do with our smartphones.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kamra Dendop. Thank you for being here, and I'm gonna end the show with the famous words from Quentin Tarantino. If you have the burning desire, if you just love cinema and have the burning desire to be involved in cinema, tell a story that nobody else has told a story, and you will be the one who will be telling that story. And if you have the desire to make movies, make a movie that nobody else has done so far. So on that note, once again, thank you very much, Mr. Kamra Dendop, and have a good night.